first of all, I want to introduce everybody. Katrina Adams is here with us. So I was just talking to her and how we had the pleasure to actually met each other many years ago when she was a touring coach for WTA professional players. This was a while back, and I'm actually very excited to have this conversation. Katrina has been an amazing pioneer in women's tennis. Obviously, she was Northwestern University student athlete. She won NCAA's doubles twice and actually was an All-American twice, and also had a lengthy and very impressive career in tennis, winning 20 WTA double titles and won twice the Player Service Award. So, oh my goodness, very exciting. And for me, an honor to be here with you today, Katrina. So thank you for having me. I think one of the most impressive and inspiring things for me is coming out of retirement and seeing you as the head and president of USTA. That was something really inspirational for me as an athlete to see you there. So very, very excited. Not only did you have that position, but you held it for 2 terms, which is the first time that's ever done for any president or past presidents for USTA. And you were the youngest, the first Black female to host that post. So wow, a lot of first things for you. I'm sure that's something that you must be very proud of. And I certainly find it very exciting and inspiring. So before we get started, though, Katrina, I want to hear your story. What was your tennis story? How did you start it? Give us a little bit more context. How you started and what got you to playing professional tennis?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Millie, for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I started playing tennis when I was 6. I call myself a tag-along sister. My 2 older brothers were in a community program that was sponsored by the Martin Luther King Boys Club, and it was summer activity for ages 9 to 18. And my parents were teachers, so they were teaching summer school. I was with my big brothers. And I literally had to sit outside the fence for about 2 weeks before I was welcomed into the program because I was too young. But, I wasn't a small 6-year-old, so I could hold my own. I was already athletic. I was a tomboy. I was very active athletically, thanks to my older brother who always had me in the backyard, throwing a ball, hitting a ball, tossing a ball, whatever that might be. And I was resilient. I persevered and with the coaches and my parents to get into the program. And at the end of the summer, 6 weeks later, I was the most improved player for the summer camp. I got a little trophy. It's the only trophy that I traveled with from my junior days and kept with me. It's in my other room right now. And that was really the beginning. It was something from the first time I hit the ball, I loved it. And I was lucky to have a coach that was part of that program that thought I had potential, took me under his wing. We continued through the school year 1 day a week. Then I started going to a program 1 day a week on the weekends on a basketball court in a field house, if you will, very fast, hence the development of my serve and volley game. And then it just kind of went from there. I went to summer camp the following year, I played my first tournament the following year, and just progressed over time. And I was very fortunate to have had the pathway that I did have that got me all the way to the WTA Tour.
That's phenomenal. I mean, it's so, like I said, so many steps that you take and you don't realize how broad and wide the tennis, the tennis or the sport of tennis can actually take you. Now let's talk a little bit about your retirement. So when you were playing professionally, when did you have your first thought of, oh yeah, I think I'm done? And what was it like after that? Like, did it take you a while to make the decision? Did you have a plan in place for after the fact? Tell us a little bit about that. How was that for you?
Yeah, I was actually fairly structured. I had all these goals that I had set when I was 12, as far as my short, mid, and long-term goals. My long-term goal was 1, to play on the tour, and 2, play until I was 30. So back in the day, being 30 was, you were considered a grandma on the tour. Seeing that not many players played beyond that. And so when I was approaching 30, I kind of said, oh, well, this is going to be my last year. I was also physically breaking down. I had some injuries that I was fighting for probably the last year of my career. going into after I turned 30. So going into my 31st year, I'd already said this is my last year, which was 1999. And I had an injury that kind of needed surgery. If I did surgery, I was going to be out for about 6 months of rehab. And I just didn't know if I wanted to do that grind at the end of my career like that to come back. So I chose not to do the surgery and just play as long as I could. So that was kind of the direction as to how I got to retirement. On the flip side, in the middle of that summer for that year, I actually got a job offer. And so I was like, I'm not really ready to retire. I wanted to finish the year. I'm in the middle of Grand Slam season. And I got a call from the USTA player development asking if I would be interested in being one of their national coaches. And so I was actually in Paris. I'll never forget it. I was in my room, got the call. It's just pre-cell phone days, the way that we have them now. And had the conversation. I was like, look, I'm in the middle of my career. I've got Wimbledon in 2 weeks, so forth and so on. I am going home. Let me think about it while I'm home before Wimbledon, and give them a call back. And so I was very lucky to kind of have something come my way. It wasn't that I retired and I was forced to look for something. And so I did do that. I accepted it and started just after Wimbledon.
Wow. Amazing, huh? Sometimes you fell right into it. That's great. And obviously you had the reputation back then and you had your skills. So that I'm sure that's that I know that for some athletes that might be listening to this, it's great to know that that can actually happen as well.
Yeah, but
So
I'd
do
already planted the seed with a couple of other national coaches previously to let them know that it would be something that I was interested in. I never thought that it would come up or that I would have the opportunity, but it's all about planting the seed and having those conversations and networking. I did a great job throughout my career speaking to any and everybody about what my goals were or what I wanted to do. I was a communications major in college, so I also wanted to commentate. So it was a lot of things that I had an opportunity to do given the chance. And that was one of them. And the coaching hit came up, and I made a deal with them that at least let me or allow me to play the US Open and retire there officially, as opposed to just stopping cold in the middle of the summer, when I wasn't ready to do so.
But I love that point, right? I love the fact that you had communicated and you networked and you make sure that everybody knew what Katrina wanted to do after the tennis player, for example. I think that's a great takeaway for all of us. So did you have any emotions? Were you fearful when you stopped playing? Tell me what happened to Katrina internally when it was not Katrina the professional tennis player anymore, but now maybe Katrina the coach. Tell us a little bit what happened there.
Yeah, it was actually funny because when I was retiring because I was tired of being on the court all the time. I was physically, I hadn't had a break since I was 6 years old, of really having a real break. And so I went straight from literally Wimbledon home on Monday, drove to Atlanta where I was moving on Thursday and was with a player on Friday, already working. And so I never had that break. I kept going. And I realized that being a coach, you're on the court way more as a coach than you were as a player, because at least when I finished practice as a player, I could go do what I needed to do, whether it was gym or run or nothing. But as a coach and working with youth and multiple youth, you're responsible for them 24/7. So it was actually, a little different than what I had anticipated, but I enjoyed it because I love kids. I love, helping others and trying to make a difference with in someone's life, particularly these young ladies that I was focused on. And so I did that for about 4.5 years, and the player development at USTA changed. And so they were kind of revamping the program. We all actually got let go. And I think for me, it was a blessing in disguise because I really needed a break. I took 3 months off, threw my rackets in the closet, never touched them, and tried to figure out what my next steps were. I had a player, B. Billick, who was just entering the WTA Tour, who I'd worked with a little bit. She just won the NCAAs from Wake Forest University and kind of flew down and begged me to start working with her again. And so I did that for about 3 or 4 months. She actually got injured, and that was kind of the end of my coaching career at that level. And so then you're like, okay, what's next? And I think
Mhm.
that's where you start to go, wow, I've never not had a plan. I've never not had an agenda for the day. Um, and I started to reflect, okay, what is it that I really want to do? And I knew I always wanted to commentate. As I mentioned, I studied communications at Northwestern University, and that was one of my goals too that I had written down. And it wasn't a lot of opportunity back in 2002, 2003, but I put myself in a position where I was assertive, I was persistent, was at the WTA finals in Los Angeles that year at the then Staples Center. And I heard the Tennis Channel was coming online at some point. And so I reached out to them, forced myself into an interview with the executive producer at the time, and had the conversations. Didn't know where it would go. I didn't really have what the resume that all of our other peers and commentators at the time did have, which were Grand Slam titles.
Mhm.
Um, but it worked. I got a call 4 months later asking me if I wanted to be the commentator for the Fed Cup in Lowell, Massachusetts, with the U.S. versus Czech Republic. And that was the first time they went on the air. I was their first analyst, and that was 20 years ago this month. So very sentimental, but you have to be able to have a plan, or at least be bold in your thoughts, and kind of step out on a limb and ask, because all they can do is say no. But if you never put yourself in that position to have that conversation, you'll never know.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about, did you have a support system in place? Did you have a team back then? Did you have a mentor, someone who was guiding you throughout all of that reflecting and going forward and, all of that? Did you have any particular person or a group of people that helped you through that?
Yeah, I mean, I still relied on my parents, I think, a lot at that time. Even though you're 30 or 31, when you've been on the tour, especially back then, life was very different. And when you retire, you then become an adult, if you will, right? Because everything is always taken care of. You've got a plan, your schedule. You don't really have to think for yourself. And so I was able to lean on my parents and ask for advice and vent, if you will, which was great. And I think I had some other friends that I spoke to, but I was very private. I never really expressed myself then as to what I wanted or what I wanted to do, out of fear of being looked down upon. Like, what do you mean you don't have a plan? Or how could you not know what your next move is? I didn't know what to expect at that time. And that's where the immaturity came into play. But I relied on, what I did on the court and what I did in my career. I mean, my strengths were being disciplined, being dedicated, hardworking, understanding how to manage time. I used some of the skills on the business side that I learned being a national coach, having to keep a budget, managing a group of people, a group of kids, if you will. And so that kind of at least was a stepping ladder to the next steps. But it was much later when I really started to rely on a mentor or mentors, if you will. Billie Jean King has always been in my ear, from a player to the transition of being that coach and then going into commentating. But she's a busy woman. So, and even then I was too shy, I guess, to kind of pick up the phone at times and ask for advice, and only relied on those times when we were together. That's changed over time, but I think it's important that you do have your mentor. I have several that I can pick up the phone and reach out to on any given day if something arises. And I think that's critical for our players that are competing now, to have those people in place. I think the world has changed, the business structure has changed, the players are a lot more business savvy now than we were. Many of them are entrepreneurs off the court while they are being an entrepreneur on the court. but it is critical to make sure that you have a pathway and you have a team around you, a business team that can support you and guide you to the next level.
Yeah, and I think, from playing on the tour as well, you sort of forget. You get so ingrained in tennis and, your day in and day out, your practice, your tournaments, everything, you sort of forget that there's a life after, right? And that, okay, so what's going to happen after that? And then when it's getting closer to it, then you start thinking, oh wow, now I need to do this. And sometimes it might be a little too late, or sometimes you don't get there at all, in the sense of, I don't have anyone to rely on, or I don't have anyone to talk to, because you were just so focused on that one goal rather than thinking in the broad picture. So yeah, great takeaways. Now, I know you've had great successes in many of areas that you've been to, Katrina. Tell us a little bit about, so we heard about Katrina the player, we heard about Katrina the coach. Now I want to know, when did that shift it from coach to then volunteer to then becoming the president of the biggest NGB, or national governing body, in the world?
Yeah, I was around, I guess really when I stopped coaching, when I got into the volunteer side of the USTA. The then president at the time, the late Alan Schwartz, had reached out. Alan was the owner of Midtown Tennis Club, one of the clubs that I grew up in Chicago. He followed my career. We were, family members almost. Reached out and asked me if I would be a committee member for the grievance committee of the USTA. And the grievance committee had to have an elite athlete at the time, which was someone that was within 10 years of retirement, had been top 50 in their country, of athletes in that sport. And I knew nothing about the volunteer side of the USTA. I had worked for the USTA and still didn't know that they had a volunteer side, or what the USTA really stood for. It was all about competitive tennis, player development, etc. And so I accepted it, and I went to an annual meeting and realized there were about 1,000 people that were there that were volunteering to, in this great sport. And I was like, wow, who are all these people? Why do they do this? And I started reflecting on the people that always reached out a hand to me in Chicago, from the Chicago District Tennis Association or the Chicago Prairie Tennis Club. These were essentially volunteers that would be at the tournaments, that were running tournaments, running programs that early Sunday mornings or early Saturday mornings. And I was like, oh, wow. So as I got more involved on the volunteer side and I finished my tenure on that committee, 2 years later, I applied to be on the nominating or board, a nominating committee or board, and went through the interview process, and they invited me to be on the board of directors for the USTA as an elite athlete. Again, it's part of the mandate from the USOPC, that a national governing body has 20% of the board be athletes. And so that's where it started. That's where I really started to learn more about the USTA on the business side, what we really did, how we were a grassroots organization. We happen to own the US Open. The US Open is what funded everything that we did below that. And so I was intrigued by that, inspired by what they did, really got engaged, involved, learned a lot more. And then over time, it was time to, my elite athlete status had expired, but I still wanted to continue on the board. So I had to run as a director at large, along with all the other business people around the country that also were applying. And in that moment, when I was reappointed, I said, oh, they really value what I say. I must be making a difference, or this is really cool. And so it just kind of led from there. And over time, I was like, I actually want to run this organization. I know I have a vision. I have some ideas, thoughts. I want to make a change. And that's what really inspired me to proceed, to run for that position. And I was fortunate enough to then become the chairman, president, and CEO of the USTA in 2015.
So tell me what it felt like to find out that you were going to stay an extra 2 terms. What was that like for you? Because you know you had two terms for sure, and then I mean, one term for sure, and then here comes and you're gonna get an extra 2 years. Being the first person that's ever given to, tell me, what did you feel? How was that conversation, and what went through your mind at the time?
Well, when I got the call, I was in shock. I was like, what? Can you repeat that? Are you sure? Because it had never happened. And, part of it was some circumstances from the first vice president who couldn't carry on or had declined. But the nominating committee could have gone in a different direction. They could have gone to the next vice president or brought back a previous president, or they could stay with me. But they thought that I was doing a great job and I was the right person at that time. And I was very fortunate, but I was elated. I was shocked. I was thrilled. I don't want to say I was scared, but I was tired because it
Mm.
really is, for me, I went all in 24/7. I traveled an awful lot, not just here in the US, going to different um, meetings or junior programs or NJTLs or what have you. I wanted to be that president that was present, that people knew that I was available, I was reachable, and that I was listening to try to make that difference. And so to have to do that again for 2 years, I mean, I did pause and think about it, but I was in a situation where I was fortunate enough to have the time to do it. I'm the executive director of the Harlem Junior Tennis and Education Program, which is an NJTL chapter here in New York. But my board had given me permission to step away for the first 2 years. And I got, made that call and say, here's an opportunity. And I was allowed to do that again for another 2 years. So, I was in the right place at the right time, doing the right things. And, I always say things happen for a reason.
Yes, I mean, and I would say one of the things that it stands out for me, and I always, whenever I hear it, comes right back to you, Katrina, is make tennis look like America. Like, is to me, that's been my motto, and I'm trying really hard to continue that because I think that is very, it's important, it's essential for tennis, and yeah, I mean, yeah, what an incredible story. I'm going to ask you, the last question, the last couple of questions are going to be a bit more specific. Tell me a little bit what particular skills as a tennis player, and I know you touched on this briefly, but I want to dig in a little bit deeper. Your tennis skills, your skills as a tennis player. Tell me how you learned to transfer those into the career that you currently have, and all throughout your career track journey.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot of what I have is what I call innate. I was kind of born with it. I was born with confidence. At least that's what my mom said. Um, and so I always carry that air and that air of confidence with me, and was very confident no matter where I went, and believed that I could do whatever it was that I was trying to do. And so I took that into tennis first. And while in the sport, I learned how to build my self-confidence further, be proud of my self-esteem, because I don't think I ever lacked that. But it taught me discipline. It taught me how to persevere. It taught me how to be patient. It taught me how to manage time. And it taught me how to be a leader, because you are that leader on and off the court. What people don't realize is, tennis is an individual sport. You are responsible for everything you do on and off the court. Off the court meaning who you surround yourself with as your team. So you become a CEO very early on without even knowing that that's your title within your camp. You're hiring your coach, you're hiring the physio, you're hiring whoever, your mental coach, whoever you're working with, they're working for you, you're not working for them. And so it took a while to be able to understand that later in my my playing career. But I think I brought all of those skills and attributes with me to the business side when I started being on boards. I joined the WTA Players Association board my rookie or sophomore year, because I wanted to learn more about the tour, what we did, how we progressed, and understand the business side of it, in which then I served on the WTA Tour board, once we had the integration back in the day, which earned me probably those player service awards that I received. But because of those experiences, that allowed me to go further when I got into the USTA board, understanding how to be on a board, what to expect. And so as I progressed through that on the business side, it was all of these things I learned through the sport that I think propelled me and prepared me to be the leader that I became.
It's wonderful. So often we forget that we are the leader of our own careers, and players forget that. And I'm gonna call myself out because I forgot that I was the leader of my own career. And then as you finish, then you start realizing, oh wow, but I did have the managing, I have managed people, I have done budgets, I've done just exactly what you mentioned. Very important. The other couple of questions I have is, one is an interesting one. Looking back in your career, in your professional tennis career, or your career in the tennis as a tennis athlete, would you do anything differently? If would you change route? Is there anything that you think that you either?
You're asked that question often, or I'm asked that question often. I would say, yeah, of course, I would have drank less beer. I would have eaten fewer desserts. I would have trained harder. I would have been in better shape. All those things that probably would have made me a better player, right? But if I did become that top player, which I would have enjoyed because that was always your goal, I might not have accomplished all the things I've done since then. So I have no regrets. There's nothing that I would change. You move through life, living and learning every single day. And I think I've learned from my successes and my losses. It's the beauty of our sport, right? We lose a lot more on the court than we win, unless you're Steffi Graf or Serena Williams. But you learn from those losses. And I think as we move through life, the things that I have done or overcome have made me who I am today, and have created the opportunities that have been put before me today. And so I wouldn't change a thing.
Oh my gosh. Last question. Nice one. What recommendations or advice do you have for players that are preparing to end their careers, or athletes that are preparing to end their careers?
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier. I don't know if it's easier or tougher now. It's easier because there's so many resources at these players' hands, at their fingertips, when it comes to Google and and Wikipedia and all these things that they can do research in their downtime. I didn't have that when I was on tour, So I think players are, they're finishing their college degrees online thanks to a program that the WTA Tour has. And so they are preparing themselves a lot better for a post career. But while you're in the career, you want to make sure that you are communicating, you are networking, you're asking questions. I didn't ask enough questions when I was on tour to people, because I always wanted people to feel that I was in control, and we're never in control, right? So, because you're still learning, you're still growing, you're developing, but have a plan. I mean, I think, I wrote a book, Own the Arena, making a difference, getting ahead, and succeeding as the only one, because I was often the only Black person or the only woman in an arena, in a room. And so those were different challenges altogether. But because of what I've learned in those experiences, I put it in a book because I wanted people to know not so much what my challenges are, but I think most people can read the book and find themselves in the same situation. The only one doesn't mean that you're the only Black or the only person of color. You can be the only male in a room. I often ask men, have you ever been the only one in the room? And they're like, oh, no. And I say, yeah, you have. You have walked in on your wife and her friends or her sisters, and you were the only male in the room, and you quickly excused yourself from that room, right? You were uncomfortable. So, get comfortable with being uncomfortable as you are making the transition from that professional career on the court to whatever your heart desires to be that professional off the court.
Thank you, Katrina. This has been amazing. I appreciate your time. We appreciate your time. Can't wait to reconnect again. And yeah, I mean, we will put a link of your book because I've heard great and wonderful things about it. I haven't read it, but it is on my list. I have tons of books that I still need to get to. That's
It's
my
over my
fault.
shoulder there. It's right there.
Yeah, it's right there on the arena. So it's great. But thank you again for your time. And yeah, we will be in touch soon.
Thank you.